the GroupWorks card deck is a tool for healthy group process and meetings that work and that bring life to the group of people that are gathering. John Abbe is our presenter tonight, and in addition to being the board president at the Co-Intelligence Institute, where I am interning, he was very involved in the creation of the GroupWorks deck, along with our friend Tree Bresson, Tom Atlee, who's the research director at the Co-Intelligence Institute, and many other group process experts. So thank you for coming out, and without further ado, I will turn it over to John.
Like Patrick mentioned the Co-Intelligence Institute a couple of times. This is the first, or one of the first events of a project that we're working on together called Let's Talk, Our New Economy. And it's partly about holding dialogues about economics, but it's really, the ultimate purpose is to raise the culture of dialogue in Eugene. And so the purpose of the dialogues in a way is to highlight, to sort of showcase some innovative conversation dialogue techniques that we're aware of. And then we're also offering directly trainings on communication, facilitation, and so on, such as this event here. And there's a flyer with more information about that. We'll talk about it at the end, I guess. But I want to say just a little more about the history of these cards. Before I dive further into that, let's actually go around with names. And the cards that I handed you, I think I said before, are different patterns that can happen in groups. They're kind of good patterns or healthy patterns that we came up with, 91 different ones. They all could have a dark side, but we tried to think of ones that generally are positive. And so I just want to invite you to go around and share your name and one time recently when you saw a pattern happen in a group that you're in. So I'll go with this. I was at General Assembly of Occupy Eugene one day, and somebody asked, was somebody willing to take notes? And nobody was emerging immediately, and finally somebody who, I don't know if she had done it before or not, I didn't know her that well. She was like, yeah, I'll take notes. And she proceeded to lay out giant sheets of paper on the ground and basically start drawing things in relation to the notes. I mean, she was writing down words as well, so some words were captured, but other things she was capturing with drawings on the floor. And I noticed myself, and I interpreted other people as someone going, oh, she's not going to get all the words, And it may be that she wouldn't have, and I saw other people making sure to write down some things that they wanted written down. But I also, at the same time, appreciated, here's a totally different way, of recording what's going on that is going to speak to some people a lot better than words. And that's, I think, one of the values of the expressive arts. It's just a different way of that we connect with each other, that we communicate. So, anybody else have? Or not anybody else, let's go around. My name is John. We don't have to go around the circle. In whatever order people want. Whoever feels moved to speak, give your name and a pattern that you saw happen recently. Or anytime.
I'm Chelsea Kaufman. I'm an arts management master's student at the University of Oregon. And I guess I recently experienced invitation with some of my classmates. We all share the same research advisor, and our advisor has been out of the country, and it's created a very stressful situation for us because she's not very good at giving expectations clearly. And so finally somebody said, hey, I'm going to a coffee shop, I'm going to work on my research, would you like to come with me? And we extended that to everyone, and just knowing that someone was paying attention to your stresses and was in the same boat as you were was very affirming.
Well, I'll go next, as long as we're going around the circle, even though that wasn't the intent. I'm Patrick Maxwell. I think I might have mentioned that already. And the card I picked is rest, which the sort of the paragraph there says, create unscheduled times for rest, reflection, integration, and nurturing important social connections. Building sufficient downtime into group process yields better overall results as participants return to group sessions renewed and often with new insights and ideas. And so my father was Quaker, still is Quaker actually, and so growing up, I got to go to a lot of Quaker meeting worship services, and there are long, long periods of silence and rest in between. It's unstructured. It's a kind of thing where if you have something to share, if you feel like you have something to share, then you get up and share it, and then you sit back down and you go back to silence. And it was a very sort of, yeah, it has this atmosphere of sort of communal rest to it, like you're resting with a group of people, that I really like about Quaker meetings. So.
Well, I guess for simplicity's sake, I'm Lauren Merch. I'm an office specialist at the University of Oregon, and I got priority focus. The office I work in does a lot of funding for support programs for students who come from low-income areas. We were recently writing a grant for one of the programs and found out it was due a month earlier than we thought it was. So the group had to completely reshift everything we were doing in the office to focus specifically on this grant, and everyone really rose to the challenge for that, and it was pretty impressive. They did it almost completely as a unit. So that was nice. And we got the grant in.
Cool. I'm Zoe Walmer. I'm a student at the University of Oregon for about another week. I don't know what I am. But I got the card Breaking Bread Together, which is a great card. I think we've all used that one. But recent example, I'm a member of a sorority at U of O, and we, in addition to using this tactic frequently, just held our sort of end-of-the-year banquet, which is a great opportunity where everyone sort of gets to acknowledge the contributions that everyone has made and come together over this shared meal that everyone cooks together and experiences together. And it's a really great way to help form that sort of group cohesiveness.
I'm Mike Elliott. I'm not good at talking, so I got Power of Place, and the only thing I can think of is I spent the weekend at Crater Lake overlooking and doing a lot of meditating, and it was a wonderful weekend. Nice place. Where you're at is nice staff. Environment. I got nothing.
What makes that a nothing? That's completely...
Is that
Did that place make a difference to you?
Oh, yeah,
the fact
definitely.
That was the place you were having an impact. That's what that card's about.
There you go.
I'm Krista Niddle, and I'm a gardener. And I have a card that says Guerrilla Facilitation. And my oldest brother died, and I'm just like grief-stricken, and I feel like my family is kind of, we're all spread out, and I'm just like mourning. I want to be with my family, and we're not together. And I don't know if I'm just so overwhelmed by this that anything I pick up, I would read into it, my brother's death. But on this card it says that there's no formal leadership structure, or when the designated facilitators are inadequate or floundering. And one of my brothers is like in charge, and I don't really appreciate his style of handling things. So I have to speak up for my deceased brother. Anyways, I have a ton of emotion, and that's all I can say.
I think you're kind of taking the road, stepping up in place of some of the ways you see it not going as well as it could.
Yeah, I hear my brother important. I feel like my brother's not being represented the way I want him to be represented.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, I'm Linda Finley. I'm the spiritual director at Center for Spiritual Living over on Coburg and Rustic. And I was at the training that John's group put together a few weeks ago on dynamic facilitation. And the card that I have here that really seems to apply is subgroup and whole group, where you break into small groups to explore the ideas, develop them more fully, and then come back to the whole group and talk about and share experiences and that sort of thing. And that's something that I thought was done very effectively, especially as they broke it down into large subgroups and then even tiny subgroups. And it was really fascinating to see the different dynamic depending on the size of the group, and it's a very effective use of getting information, I think, and sharing and allowing people to feel like they're being heard.
I'm Mark Levinowitz, and one of the cards here is about history and context, which is my favorite topic. I've been an amateur professional student of 20th century history for most of my life, and with a focus on trying to understand the roots of how we got into the mess of collapse. And I have found, in terms of group process, that to raise these concerns, I have lost count of the number of groups, especially in Eugene, I have been asked to leave for raising these topics. And to the point that I've pretty much given up on the idea of making groups work in Eugene. One group I was involved with was on the West Eugene Parkway. And one of the other cards here is not about you. We had alpha males and alpha females who did their best to sabotage what we were doing. And I love cooperation, but I don't love groupthink. And there's an important difference.
So I'm hearing you talking about some of the cases where the patterns don't happen, which is also interesting. I'm wondering if you have an example where any of these patterns did happen.
Not in Eugene. I mean, I've been profoundly disappointed by the Eugene sort of progressive community being unwilling to live up to its own values that it professes.
What about other places, or in your family, or any of these?
Well, in terms of social activism, for lack of a better word, on the West Eugene Parkway, I did the technical work that resulted in the no-build in 2007. And I found, after trying to deal with the group process, it was far more effective dispensing with it, to be honest. It was unpleasant, but it was very weird to get more respect from the highway builders than from Eugene Weekly and Friends of Eugene and a few other folks like that who were more interested in status and ego than whether what they were doing made any sense.
So when you were working with the city, you found that people carried this not about you better?
The people who were trying to get the most attention to themselves were also the ones who were being the most counterproductive.
No, I mean, you said it was funny to get more respect from the people with the city you were working with. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if when you were working with them, that's like, in a sense, another group you were working with. At least at least in a meeting or something.
Well, they
were.
Is
it that they seem to have less ego, that they were manifesting not about you better?
Oh, I think it was also an intellectual thing, because they were the people who were paid by the state and the federal government to promote the project. Yet they had a meritocracy type respect for the work that was being done.
So I mean, does that sound to you like they were carrying this not about you
To an extent, it doesn't quite fit it exactly.
Okay.
Right. But I know Tom will agree that one of my favorite parodies of all of this is The Life of Brian by Monty Python. And I think for groups to function well, it has to not just be beyond the egocentrism, but there has to be a mechanism that when a few people try to hijack the process and run it into the ditch, there has to be a collective understanding that, no, this is unacceptable.
Sure.
And that I have found sorely lacking.
Sure. Well, we'll talk about that very explicitly in a moment. Stop and welcome Tom. Welcome, Tom. Do you want 3 cards and a chance to introduce yourself?
Sure, I guess.
Welcome.
How about some oxygen and 3 cards?
So we just went around and shared our names, and then any time when we saw one of these patterns manifesting in some way in a group.
Okay. I'm Tom Atlee. My bus was late, so I missed my second bus. And then there was a long walk from the bus, so I didn't realize it was going to be so long and strange. Anyway, I'm here. I'll probably have to leave 15 minutes early to get the other bus, but I don't want to be caught till 11 o'clock at night.
Or if I could give you a ride,
Anyway.
I'd be happy to.
Oh, in that case, great.
The gifting's already underway.
Yes. So, I guess there was a thing about group culture, you know, he's talking about. So, it says here, groups tend to develop their own culture over time based on knowledge, beliefs, practices, and behaviors their members hold in common. Awareness of shared culture builds trust, cohesion, and a sense of safety among the members, thus furthering collaboration, unless the culture is screwed up, in which case awareness of your shared culture, if it's screwed up, can also help, because you can do something about it. If you're not aware of how screwed up your group culture is, you're pretty screwed up.
So are you
And this is to help us become aware of our group culture.
So are you thinking about that in relation to a particular group, or just in general?
No, I just the references that were given to groups that, you know, allow themselves to be taken over or whatever.
Right. So I
Rampant in progressive circles.
is there any group you've been in where you've seen one of these happen recently, or whenever,
Recently.
or anytime?
Well, I remember going to what was called Plan. I think it was called Plan Progressive Lane Action Network was one of the efforts to pull together progressives. And I remember there were about, you know, a dozen groups represented in this meeting, and a couple of us said, because they went around and around and around, and we said, well, if you could have people come out to Lost Valley, get like a person or two from each group and come out to Lost Valley for a weekend, we can pretty much guarantee you that you will come out with some project that you all want to do during the coming year, and it'll be great. And they said, we don't have time for that. We only have, you know, if you can't do it in 3 hours, we're not interested. And it's like, that's a group culture thinking that you can get important things done in 3 hours that are going to define your lives for the next whatever. So for me, it was very obvious that it was a collective agreement that we don't have time to really handle our real issues. Because from my perspective, you need to take time to do that kind of thing.
Right.
So what happened?
Hmm?
So how did it turn out?
We didn't have anything to offer them. It'll be 3 hours, so the meeting left. I never went back.
So there's I think, as Tom pointed out, just being aware of the group culture, even if what you're become aware of seems like, because of that, we don't see how to move forward. There's another card out there somewhere, and one of you might have it or not, called the power of constraints. So if you're trying to work with a group, what that suggests is to take that fact of group culture and try to think about it as like, okay, if that's a constraint, what kind of process could we do in 3 hour chunks, you know, that might move things forward. And that's if you want to keep working with them. If you decide to let it go, you decide to let it go. But if you want to keep working with them, instead of being like, here's this awful thing getting in our way, you play this other card and go like, okay, here's a constraint they have. How can I work with that?
And there's you trying to build group culture in the Co-Intelligence Institute that both of us are part of by using the cards when we have face-to-face meetings. You're pulling out cards and going, you know, the culture of actually using the cards to reflect and become more self-aware as a group.
That's part of the whole point of having, part of the whole point of this class is to increase everyone's awareness of groups. I think that's especially powerful in a group that's going to continue meeting over time, or among people who are going to keep seeing each other over time, to develop a culture of being aware of culture. We imagine can be helpful. These cards came out of 3.5 years of work that Tree Bresson and Tom Alley and myself and a number of other people put a lot of time and energy into, a lot of us with background in a lot of different group processes, consensus, facilitation, different ways of running meetings, different ways of holding groups. And sort of one thread of the story is a colleague of ours, Peggy Holman, was an editor on a book called The Change Handbook. A lot of these good process things actually come out of the business world, like they need to have good process. So this partly came out of that. And the first book covered, 17
It's 18, first book.
18 different processes. It had, a chapter on each one. And the response was very positive. They said later somebody wanted to do a second edition, so they had 57? 61 processes in the second one. And that one was a fatter book, and got a lot of spread. We were at the conference where that one was released. And people, well, what's the next edition going to have? It's going to have 250, processes, or who knows what. And Peggy was like, no, I think it's done with having the number of processes covered going up. And she wrote her next book, which is called Engaging Emergence, about, I'll never have the numbers exactly right, 7 or 8. She picked out 7 or 8 different themes that sort of exist across all these different processes, trying to draw out some general principles, some general concepts for understanding how groups can work well. And so basically our effort was sort of a parallel thing that didn't shoot for a number as low as 7 or 8, but we have 91 different patterns, and each one is not an entire process. None of these tells you how to, organize an event or what have you in and of itself, but you can use them collectively to plan a meeting, prepare for an event. You can also use them for learning. I think already we've heard a bunch of stories about how these patterns apply and happen or don't happen in groups. You can use them for learning about your own strengths and weaknesses, and I'll touch on that briefly in a minute. And also, we'll go through all these, some different ways of using them for learning. But I wanted to start with, we're speaking a little bit about group culture and whatnot, about values. Because this is not a value-neutral deck. We didn't just say, here are the patterns we see happening out there. We tried to pick out what are the patterns that we see as being healthy, as helping groups to learn and grow and be real with each other and accomplish good things in the world and so on. All the cards I think manifest that in some way, but some more pointedly than others. And I just wanted to go through a few of them as examples of that, of some of those values. So one is power shift. So that's explicitly about not wanting to leave power in the hands of a few people who, if they're doing things in a way that isn't going to work, you're kind of out of luck. And maybe kind of a parallel or closely related one is taking responsibility. It's not just about they have to get out of the way, but if we want to be in power, we have to take responsibility and do what needs doing. Another one I would say is circle. Most of the processes that I'm feel in tune with tend to put people in a circle, and that relates to the power shift. We're not putting somebody at the head in front of everybody else. Or if we are, like say right now, this is kind of a semicircle, right? And I'm in kind of this privileged position. The camera's on me, which I want to pause for 1 moment and check. Is there any? We can erase this if need be, but I just wanted to check. There are people who couldn't be here tonight. Is there anybody who objects to this being recorded and made available? Okay. And if something happens by the end that you're like, then okay, now I'm uncomfortable. Let us know. That's fine. So anyway, as I was saying, as far as being in a privileged position here, when we do that in what I would think of as healthy group process, we put the experts on tap, not on top. So I'm not telling you all what to do. I'm available as a resource is how I'm trying to think of myself and how I would invite you, to hold me. So if I'm doing something that doesn't seem like it's furthering this whole thing, stop and let me know.
There's a card in there called Challenge, just so you know.
It's also in there. And then guerrilla facilitation would also be relevant to that. I won't go through all these, but just another one would be shared leadership and roles. So making even more explicit, that we don't leave, single people or small certain groups of people in charge indefinitely, and everybody can take on different roles. And shared airtime. We want everybody to have a chance to have their voice in the room, which is part of why I asked for an intro, not just of your name, but also of some experience you've had recently, just to get us all here. Even though this is a context where, a lot of it's about me offering some things. So there's some other ones that I would say relate mostly to values. We don't need to go through all of them. But so I'd like to now offer a few cards that I think relate to, well, before we go on with that, let me stop, haven't gone this far. Just any questions or thoughts so far?
Who say we're all equal and then want to be more equal than others, to use the animal farm phrase. I mean, almost every single progressive quote-unquote group that I've been in, that's actually how they function, which is why I stopped going to them. But it's kind of a shame because you can, when they're working well, groups can be more effective than groups of individuals. But I'm convinced
how do you get there from
a
here?
lot of the secret structure of how these groups work is to keep new people from coming in.
Ooh. So let me see. Let's see. One would be transparency. And then, I mean, as far as the specific response in the moment, I think it really could matter. It would depend on the context. So, I mean, at a certain moment, challenge might be the right thing. But at some moments, that might just sort of amp up. It might turn into a war, right? You don't want
In
that
my experience,
either.
that doesn't work.
I think it depends on the moment. There are moments where it's ripe, and often what precedes a successful challenge might be listening, which is another one in here. So even, if somebody is being unreasonable, I trust at least that there is always some human reason behind why somebody's doing what they're doing. It may or may not be the substantive thing in what they're saying. Maybe it's they just want to know that they're in the important place or something, right? But I could listen to them and respect that. Like they want respect. They want, try to have some understanding for them where they are. And often if I show that, that can open them up a little bit to hear a challenge in a better way. But it's just hard to know, situation by situation. And there are some cases where you wouldn't necessarily face that person directly head on. You might, I'm trying to think of what cards this would be. People familiar with the deck, help me out, or look at the cards in your hands. But you might go and connect with other people, and do the transparency work among others. And I mean, in some sense, it can get to a point where you might amass power among others.
That would probably be in the preparation thing.
Be part of that, sure.
That in terms of things that you do beforehand,
right?
If you have an idea of what you want to do, things you do beforehand. I was also thinking of guerrilla facilitation and questions.
Mm-hmm.
That there's the ability to ask provocative questions. It's like, are we doing what we really want to do here?
Mm-hmm.
Which suddenly everybody in the group is going, well, are we? And that can shape it. There's a variety of things you can do. There's no one, this will do it,
right,
kind of thing. But getting sophisticated about the kinds of things that are in the cards can help do that. If you want to stick in the group and keep trying.
Yeah, there's no magic bullet here, but I could easily go through the deck and come up with 4 or 5, and then hearing your specific situation, probably come up with another 4 or 5
Well,
cards.
it's several different situations.
Yeah, so each one will be different. So one way to use the cards is to prepare to design an event. And I'll just offer a few that I would go through to do that.
I just realizing preparing from the previous example can be more than designing.
Absolutely.
Designing is one dimension of preparing, and connecting up with others and talking about what you're going to do in somebody else's event is another.
Right. I probably need to get down the number of this, but I'll go with it. So first I would say is purpose. If you're going to hold some kind of event, bring some kind of group together, it helps to know what do you want to get out of it. If you don't have that clear, probably a lot of other things are going to be fuzzy and maybe frustrating. Another would be group culture, which came up already, which I really just put in here as one. I could have put history and context in as kind of a more general one, but it's kind of a know the ground of what you're stepping into. And then when it starts to get more specific, okay, where are you going to have it? It could be a physical place, could be online. but each place has its own unique characteristics that are going to affect the whole thing. Another is the invitation. So which is both literally inviting people and what it says, but also it's very connected to the purpose. It's like, what are you inviting people for? Having that be clear. And then, to my mind, then coming up to the event beginning, I know I can often be in the mad, preparation of logistics beforehand the event, so I always try to remember to stop and do some centering and make sure that I'm present before I go in, because I find it's generally more important that I am actually there with whatever is going on than that I have every last T crossed and I dotted. And then we come to the opening and welcome, whatever it is that calls people together. The ringing of the bell could be the part of the going around and giving names, but what is the thing that sort of helps to bring everybody here and open the space up? And then when you're in the middle of it, I could pick so many cards. A lot of them are things that you would do in the course of an event, like listening or challenge, what have you, breaking bread together. But two that are pretty much always there is one is holding space. That's a lot of what the facilitator will do, even when they're not speaking. Being present, listening and attending to people, noticing things about what's going on, being aware of the time, who's not getting a chance to speak, all those kinds of things. And then the mode choice, what thing are we doing at each moment? Which is both, so the expressive arts, is sort of a mode choice that's sort of outside of the way most processes usually go, but something you might want to do. And then when it's over, as we say in some processes. So what's the closing? What do you do at the end to sort of mark the end of the event and to sort of release the energy for things to go on from there? I didn't pull in the cards, but there's harvest, a card called harvesting. That's often something you would do as part of closing. What are you going to take forward from the event into other events? So to me, beyond that sort of linear set of things, there's the iteration. We're probably going to have another event later. So keeping that in mind, from the beginning, or at least when it's done, thinking about what you're going to do next. And then fractal, which is this thing of the same patterns happening at all scales, from large scale to small scale. So within an event, you may have little cycles of opening and closing. When we start this agenda item, that is an opening. And if it's a decision-making agenda item, when we get to the end and we make the decision and it gets recorded in the notes, that's kind of the closing, and then we go on to the next one. And the same at the larger scale. You can have a whole series of meetings that are sort of conceived as one thing, having an opening and closing. So that's kind of one layout of a series of cards you might go through to be helpful in thinking about how to design an event. So are there any questions or thoughts come up from that?
You got any questions? You heard something wasn't clear?
No. I'm maybe I shouldn't have come because I'm kind of upset, and it's not about you. I told the group my brother just died.
Oh,
And I'm sorry, I haven't been sleeping well, and maybe shouldn't have come, but I wanted to hear, and I'm sorry.
I'll stop.
Well, what I wanted to comment on, I don't know if I'm leaping you out of order or anything,
That's
but
fine.
I bought these at the other event.
Mm-hmm.
And what I loved is this little, like, cheat sheet, which talks about the various processes and all the various cards that speak to that. And that really seemed to me to pull everything together, because you had talked a bit about these then, and I... it just creates a wondrous outline of preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe now would be a good time. I think we have enough copies for everybody to have one of that same.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so that's in
Take
what's
two
handing
pages
around
and
now
pass
is
it
an
around.
overview listing all 91 patterns um, and putting them into 9 different categories, which are loosely in order that you might consider them going from the beginning to the end of an event gathering.
I really appreciated getting this holding space card because in my graduate school classes, we do a lot of group work, and it almost always is horrible. It's a very negative experience for everyone involved, and it just makes everyone more stressed out. And we know we're supposed to be learning to work together, but I think it's because we don't have any of these things. We can't be fully present, aware of what's happening. We're physically, energetically, emotionally, intellectually drained, and it doesn't set up a good space for having any sort of meaningful work. So even though it doesn't work out positively, it's perhaps nice to know why it's not working well.
And so what do you think it is that would help some of you or all of you to be able to hold space?
I don't know. One might be to not be quite so drained. I think that's a little impossible. Oh,
Patrick
yes.
has the rest
This
card.
doesn't but maybe perhaps greater recognition that the other members of the group are going through the same thing. They're not purposefully trying to make you more stressed out. They're just reflecting back.
Mhm. So that would probably be another card.
Good faith assumption? Is that what you're going
That would
for?
certainly, sure.
Okay.
That would be there. So yeah, if you're like, why are they being so fluttery around this thing? Oh, they probably also haven't gotten enough sleep. So, but I might only think that if I start by assuming they don't mean anything bad by it. So any other questions or thoughts on using the cards to prepare for an event? So actually, I want to step through maybe an example of using some of these anyway. I mean, we'll just ask, does anybody have an event that they are planning where they'd be willing to have us talk a little bit about using the cards and talk a little bit about how we might plan that event? And it could be something as simple as having your folks over for dinner. It doesn't have to be a thing to say to me, well, yeah.
Something. I'm graduating from college this upcoming weekend, and my fiance and I are hosting a joint celebration with both of our families coming together for the first time since our engagement and graduation. There's a lot of different people who haven't met each other and a lot of different celebrations going on, so it'll be a really interesting group environment.
Great. Yeah.
Yes. So let's figure that out.
Booze.
That's pretty much the plan so far. We got that one. Booze and we got breaking bread together and drinking bread together.
I'm not finding it right now, but there's actually a card celebration. So that would actually obviously be a very important central one. We wanted to make sure that. So I would guess that would be a lot of the purpose, right? The celebration. But what else, what would be other purposes? That's the first one.
Building relationships
Uh-huh.
between our families.
Uh-huh. So there's actually a card, 10 relationships. And so then the next one is group culture. what does that bring to mind for anybody?
At this point, she's trying to build basically a whole new family out of these two separate units. So
It's a merging of two cultures. What's that about?
There's two cultures, and thinking about what each one is like. There might be more, right? Even within one family, you might have multiple cultures, but you're certainly going to have at least two, and that can be part of what you think about. Like, what are the activities, that both groups might want to do together?
And the personality, beyond the personalities, you're breaking bread, who's gluten-free, who's meat-free, who's carnivore.
And on that front, there's another card called hosting, which is really specifically about things like that, making sure that each person feels welcome, that the things that matter to them, their particular diet, other needs they might have around a seat, maybe somebody can't sit on a chair, you make sure they have a cushion on the floor, and some of that can be done in advance preparation, but some of it it's good to have somebody. If you have enough people to hold space, somebody who's specifically focused on those kinds of things and making sure that people are held well.
Subgroup and whole group is an obvious one.
What?
Subgroup and whole group is an obvious card. And the honoring each person, there's a way in which, like going around having circle process where people have something interesting to say. There's all sorts of games you can play like that, whatever, where they show up as themselves rather than as a member of these two parties or in their roles of the families and all that, to just show up as themselves early on in the event can help just have we're all together, kind of feeling.
Again, just cards I had in here. Power of place. Do you know where you're gonna?
It's going to be at our apartment.
So there, and and my immediate thought is what? It's the perfect place because it's the place that the two of you share. Mm-hmm. It is your common place, so both of you will feel comfortable there, which will help make each of your families.
How long?
How long was the event? That's a good question. Probably 2 or 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And the next one that I had in line is invitation. And again, it's it doesn't mean you have to have a written out formal thing, but where do people go with that? What's important in the context of this event as far as invitation goes?
Well, I think the context, it's such a celebratory thing. You've gotten engaged, you're getting married, you've graduated, and having that, there's all these sort of really happy things that sort of serve as the invitation already, right? And just that is going to draw people in, and it's just sort of a matter of saying hey, this all is happening, come to our apartment, and we'll break bread together or whatever.
So part of what I'm hearing is in this context, maybe it's not so important to spend a lot of time and attention on this because the context itself sort of so strongly suggests what the invitation is.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Since she was talking about relationship, I was focusing on the relationship section, a lot of appreciation. And I've been in 2 birthday parties, which went in opposite directions using appreciation. In one, the person whose birthday it was went around and appreciated for specific things every single person who came to the party, which was really powerful. And the other one, everybody in the group said something they appreciated about the person who was, in the sense of, again, trying to help it get, unless people go, oh my God, another new agey thing, I don't know what these people are like. But if they are open to, conscious relationship building things, that can be a powerful mode. And just generic appreciation, really, really appreciate everybody coming out, whatever, that kind of thing.
And then I have the presents card, so that would be in your mad rush of getting ready for them to come over, trying to remember to pause for a moment, remember to be there with the people who show up. Opening and welcome. Where do you go with that?
A safe place for Beaver fans to go.
I don't know about that.
No Beaver fans in your family?
No, actually, my dad went to OSU, so.
So
long-standing discussion.
So history and context may be relevant.
And you got rest in there. She needs rest.
So I can go through the rest of the holding space. Anything particular to mind?
In what sense?
Well, I would say in a sense of, if I'm at a party, I might get carried away with the conversation over here to the point that I stop paying any attention to the whole group. And that's, depending on how things are going, I might want to make sure I have some continuing attention to what's going on. And holding space not just for where I am or what's going on with me, but also with the whole thing. So maybe, yeah.
Oh, one comment on that, holding space. It's sort of within the context of like small group meetings like this. It's generally like you kind of think about it as sort of the tone you set or the mental and emotional space you create. I've also heard it used to describe things you do, like if you step outside of the group, things that you do so that the group can continue holding the meeting or the event or whatever as it is. So it might be as simple as like stepping out, maybe not you, because you're probably going to be like the center of attention, but somebody stepping out and doing dishes or making sure the dog's fed or whatever, so that the rest of the group isn't distracted by outside things and can continue to be in the celebratory space where they are.
What one is that?
Say what?
What one?
Holding space. Mm-hmm.
And I would go also into the New Age woo-woo thing. Was the idea of holding a space in my mind that this is a successful event, that everything goes smoothly, to enter into it without fear and doubt, but with a sense of anticipation and joy. To hold that space.
Along those lines too, there's one on here that's dual with emotions. I mean, you're just got engaged, you're graduating, you're moving to a whole other state. So don't be afraid to let that happen while you're there. Remember that other people are going to be feeling that too. So it doesn't have to be perfect.
It's going to be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, two things that relate to what you said also is the transparency card, which we already saw, and dealing with emotions. Everything makes me think of several cards.
I was thinking of a mixture of embrace dissonance and difference and value the margins. It's like there are, who's going to be radically different from everybody else in the room, and how do you consciously welcome that into the space so everybody can feel comfortable, and that also models, it's one of the modeling things, also models we're going to accept, I don't know who the people are, I can pull examples out of the air, but that's that's like a part of a group where it's dialogue and deliberation stuff. Online, we're talking about a lot of this stuff, and overwhelmingly people are liberal, and there's like a handful of conservatives in our mix, and just the language that we use in talking together can make them feel unwelcome, and the woman who's in charge of it consciously raises that issue and says, let's watch our language, and these people are very much part of our group and all that.
And then there's a mode choice. Was a card I had to think about preparing events. So you're gonna break bread together. That's one mode. Eating. You're gonna play games, or have you thought at all about what else to do with the time?
No, actually, that's a good point.
So what do you think of now that you are thinking about it?
It's kind of a cocktail party setup, so mostly sort of drinking, eating, talking. At least my family is very talkative and can easily fill many, many hours with that activity alone.
And what about his family?
The ones that I have met are along a similar vein.
Uh-huh.
So I think that will be a pretty good activity.
So that's something where, again, like you said with the invitation, it may or may not matter, to put a lot of attention on the thing. But even if you end up deciding you don't need to put attention on it, it's often better to have checked and realized that than to realize after the event, I wish I had thought more about, what if there were families that didn't just could talk easily, and having some activity would help them to come out of their shell.
One activity that's good for introducing yourself is to say 3 facts about yourself two of which are true and one of which is a lie, or vice versa. So if you want a humorous thing for people to do, and it's often the one that's weirdest is the true one.
And then what about closing? Is there even have a fixed ending time, or what? Where do you go with that?
Everybody's drunk.
Now I'm nervous. No, I suppose I assume people will, at a certain point, become tired and go back to their hotels, and folks who are not will probably begin drinking more heavily and eventually later become tired.
Take care of itself.
There is a trick I learned when I owned a bar. Just turn the heat up, and when it gets really, really warm, people who are drinking will start to feel it and say, "Gosh, I gotta go." It's getting warm in here. You said, "No."
No, not at all.
Which raises a good point. I was thinking of the closing in terms of sort of, what would work best for the group? What would serve the group best in terms of closing? But, the power of place, it's your place. When are you done with it? It's good to have a strategy in mind.
That's why the library plays classical music outside.
That's right.
What's your exit time?
Power of constraints.
And then iteration, so that would be like, when are they all going to get together again? Might be a question, right? Do you know when? Where are your families?
They're spread across the country, so probably the next time they would all be in the same place would be at our wedding.
There you go. But there you go. There's when you're going to have your wedding, you're probably going to have even more planning, just a little bit, right?
A little bit.
So here's an opportunity that comes up when I think of iteration. You could do something at this event, which you're in some way going to weave into your wedding.
Oh, wow.
And that could really contribute something to the families connecting, in a deeper way, because they hit the same thing, and for a second time in a way.
Yeah.
I'm getting worked up nervous about it. Now I charge only $100 to help you plan your event after this.
Yeah.
But I actually do want to take the chance. This is an opportunity, since there's a bunch of us. If anybody else has an event that they would like to do some planning around, I was thinking we could split into two groups, and you could work more on yours, or if somebody else wanted to work in one group, and then the other group could work on another one. Is there anybody else who has something coming up that they think it might be fun to use the cards a bit to plan around?
Or an event you're going to participate in that you want to plan some guerrilla facilitation.
Exactly, right. It doesn't have to be something that you're holding. It could be your next class, or family reunion, or the next march you're going to go to on the street, or the next time you go to church. We all are in groups. The next time you go to work, it could be anything.
Wow.
Well, then
It's an abstract curiosity that brought us here.
That is where I go next. Like I do, it does make me curious to want to hear from a couple people anyway.
So why the hell are you here?
What are you hoping to get out of this? We have almost another hour, but
I was just adding a group thing that was actually quite interesting. It was not in Eugene.
And so that made you want to come here to try and understand what happened better, or?
No, but it's a model of transcending some of the problems that I see with the groups.
So what is it that made you interested? What were you hoping to get out of coming here today?
Some understanding about how to transcend some of the ego problems that I'm not a progressive. I sympathize with some of the progressive values, but that's not my flavor of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And the event that I went to was called The Age of Limits, as in the limits to growth. And it was talking about the new economy, but without using euphemism.
Mm-hmm.
It talked about collapse. And the thing that was so refreshing about it was pretty much everybody who came already got all of these things. That's why we traveled from all over the country. This was actually in Pennsylvania over Memorial Day weekend. It was Friday through Monday. And it was long enough to be more than a 3-hour thing where not much can get done. The one negative about it was they had advertised it was going to be more interactive rather than we talk, you listen. Because I think for those of us who've been reading about this for years, we're past that point. And most of the sort of eco-friendly type things I see in this community, they all assume that the audience has never heard of it. Even though most of the time the audience has heard it more times than they care to recall.
So you said they advertised it as being more interactive, and did it end up not being as much that way as you hoped, or?
It was not as much as we hoped, and there are actually a number of people who have publicly given feedback on this, and that's pretty much the consent. I mean, they tried.
This would be the shared airtime.
But it wasn't quite...
more greatly shared airtime. Uh-huh.
I don't like the writer George Monbiot that much anymore, but he's a British commentator. But he said if you tell people things they already know, they will like you for it. If you tell them something new, they will hate you for it. And I can relate to that completely. With the new economy, how many groups want to talk about the limits to growth model, which is 40 years old now? I don't know of any in this community. I used to organize a lot of events on this topic, and it's been a couple of years since I have tried.
So what's the missing thing there? Is what I'm hearing. The people's willingness to
One of the last groups I was involved with was the Peak Oil and Climate Change Coalition, which met for almost a year without ever doing anything, to the point that a bunch of us just said, fine, we're walking with our feet. And there was a participant in there who used to work for Food for Lane County, doesn't live in this community anymore, who said, we all know you're right, but we don't want to hear it. And I think it's about psychology. And there's some really deep-seated... Our country has PTSD, just contemplating what has been going on the last several decades and living under all the countless threats that we're in. And I think for most people it's just too much. They tune out. That's why they numb themselves with television or drugs or all the countless distractions of corporate entertainment that is for us.
So I get that challenge of when people are faced with something that kind of questions enough of how they're doing things, that there can be this response of whoa, I don't want to go there. So to kind of connect it, to what we're doing here, I guess I want to open the inquiry to kind of everybody in situations where that's a factor. There's people who are not willing to face difficult truths. What have you seen? What, if anything, have you seen groups do that helped get those people to a point where they were willing to look at those difficult truths?
Can you have good group process with wildly differing understandings of what's going on?
Well, that's a different challenge. I mean, there's a number of different challenges in what you're talking about, but I'm just picking out the one of people not being willing to face difficult truths. And I trust that that there are things you can do in groups that will help people get to the point of being willing to face them. And I just want to tap the wisdom of the group, which is another card. Trust the wisdom of the group.
I don't know that it's an answer or solution, but I know when we had one of our subgroups, one of the large subgroups in the dynamic facilitation thing, what we finally came to realize as we dealt with this concept of apathy and what makes people crazy is that really we came to believe that apathy is a coping mechanism for overload. Mm-hmm. That I become apathetic when I feel hopeless and helpless. Mm-hmm. And so what would I suppose to follow that then would be to find ways of empowering people, to help people feel that they do have choices, they do have options, they do have ways of doing things that will get them out of that need to just be apathetic, to distance themselves from the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say empowerment exercises of some sort would be a useful tool.
Well, kind of like what Chelsea's talking about with having group dynamics. And when I was an undergrad, we did a lot of group projects too, and it's the same thing. No one wants to do it. Everyone's tired. They all have their own stuff going on, and holding space for everyone to kind of vent that, and then be able to listen to the fact that other people are also going through stuff. They're more open to listening to you if you offer that to them. So taking a little extra time, even though no one has the time to take, actually helped a lot and got things done much faster in the end.
Go slow to go fast.
And there's a line, I have the dwell with emotions card right here. And there's a line that I think is relevant. It says, let emotions be expressed and acknowledged without jumping in to fix or change them. And I think that's like that sort of combined with the holding space card that you had. Just like, yeah, like I was I was in that practice group with you.
We were in there. We were there.
When we were talking about what apathy is the fear of caring too much, I think was the phrase we came up with. But like holding a space where you can just like dwell with emotions and not like necessarily be like, oh, okay, well you should just do this with them, but just acknowledging them and not trying to fix them. I think that's pretty key.
I'm thinking also of the situation I know Mark's in often of coming in with this large picture into a group that's focusing on things that are smaller, and there's a card right size bite, which is, you really want people to just, and I have this exact same problem from my perspective, you want people to get it all, and they're not ready to for whatever reason, informational, ideological, psychological, emotional, whatever. So part of it is a mixture of history and context. Can you understand who these people are and what they're doing, and where common ground, another card, where the common ground might be, and trying to present a right-sized bite if you want to engage at all with that group. It also may be here, common ground is one of the most powerful reasons why you felt good going to this meeting, because everybody was on the same page, at least in terms of the understanding of what's going on. So you could go from there into going deeper, and moving into action, stuff like that. But that may not be. There may not be lots of groups like that. A lot of the groups that are active here don't share the common ground. So either you're there trying to
time zones.
piss on the rock for a while and see if you can make an effect, or you go find your own friends.
I really like the red size bite, because the conversation we were having before that was, well, what can we do to get people to the point where they'll be willing to look at this gigantic, scary truth, and that might work, listening to their, yeah, right, you have the right size bite right there. The other option is to try and pick, a less scary, a piece of the big truth that's too scary to face, try to come up with a chunk of it that's still real and substantial, but small enough that they might be willing to look at that piece of it. Yeah.
Well, both of us Tom and I were audience members, I guess is probably the right way to describe it, at a City of Eugene planning process a couple of years ago, the Climate Energy Action Plan. And the coordinator of this is a city employee who in private pretty much had the same view about overshooting collapse that I did. Yet, as a public role in the meeting, was heavily censored, and one of their focus, in terms of right-sized bite, was one of the ways I've tried to deal with peak energy is attack highway construction. I've done this for 20 years. I've gotten some highways stopped, and I've lost some highway fights as well. And they couldn't even acknowledge, even though a lot of the people in the group were willing to say, Eugene is $1 billion highway plan, which not a single environmental group in this community will touch. Not a single environmental group in the state of Oregon will touch. Yet, the obvious, if we're going to talk about energy consumption over the next couple of decades, talking about spending billions on highways, I mean, call me naive, but I think that deserves a tiny mention, at least as a footnote, if not in 200-point type. And so it was a really interesting example of how logic and group process get corrupted by bureaucracy. Because the person who was making the censorship decision privately agreed. He had no qualm whatsoever. And in private, on the telephone, or when others were not listening, you know,
So were you connecting that to right size bite somehow?
Yes.
Or
because
a little more?
I've been concerned about peak oil for a quarter century. And it's such an enormous topic that affects everything that how do you get a handle on it?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Realize right size bite doesn't say small bite. So from the perspective of the city, right size bite is small because it's politically more able to be handled. And from Mark's perspective, right size bite is big.
well,
Right is a funny word.
it's a much smaller bite than dealing with the global transformation of everything. But one of the countless ways to deal with it is to put a survey stake through the heart of the highway system and say, no, this is not an appropriate way to prepare for the future. You can argue what the future is going to be, and we'll see who's right. But widening Beltline to 11 lanes is not preparing for an energy-constrained future.
So I want to check if I understand. Are you saying that that addressing climate change over, and so on overall is too big a bite? You could see in some ways, and so trying to just address the $1 billion highway plan in Eugene felt like a more of a doable scale thing.
Yes.
Yeah. And it sounds like you've had.
I mean, there are many other bites, and there's 1,000 other ways to do it. But that's one piece of the puzzle. And in terms of our common wealth, it's the single largest expenditure that our common wealth will be going for in terms of a line item purchase by the community, is represented by various bureaucratic agencies that most people don't even know they exist.
I'm curious as he's talking, and I'm thinking about all this. Is it seems as though this sort of outline, this sort of the deck, could be used not just for groups, but for any sort of an action plan, any sort of a laying out a sequence, project management, if you will, type of situation. It isn't just for a group event, but for any project.
Absolutely.
Essentially, the things are the same.
Yeah. Yeah. So to give you a little more history about the cards. So I've been talking about these as individual patterns. We worked as hard as we could to make them collectively, as coherent as possible into something that we might call a pattern language. Pattern language, the idea of that originated with an architect, Christopher Alexander, and some people who worked with him, who developed a pattern language of building. And they didn't even mean just a single building, but community, across several scales, good patterns for building, which included things like, give some special attention to the north sides of buildings, or in the southern hemisphere it would be the south sides of buildings, because the sun is going to be blocked by the building. It can easily be dark and dingy. You want to give some special attention to keep that space alive, like a good space to be in. Or another one is be near water, which is both, for any individual dwelling and sort of for a community in general to be located near water for many reasons. Or have light on two sides. So when that's specifically inside your buildings, try to make it so that each room has light coming from two sides. It'll be much better lit and so on. So a lot of people since then, that's had a significant impact among architects, and it's also become popular in a number of other fields. For example, the original wiki was developed by a programmer who wanted to get a bunch of programmers together to develop a pattern language of programming. And so they developed wiki. This was years before Wikipedia. And then we used a wiki when we were developing this pattern language of group process. So in a sense, there's pattern languages of many different things. There's one on the conservation economy, which is specifically about the economy and getting it more in tune, with the ecology. So you can develop these pattern languages in regard to any number of different fields. And when we started this project, we actually talked about, are we talking about just group process, Or is it including all the way down to individual process and learning and growth, and all the way up to very large scale, political, legal, economic systems and so on? And we decided, well, that would be pretty broad. Let's try and constrain it a little bit. We take advantage of the power of constraints and say we're going to focus on group process. But even though we did that, as you pointed out, a great many of the cards make perfect sense applying them at other scales as well, larger and smaller. So that's absolutely correct, and not, I think it has to do in part with any time you try to derive some general principles about how things work, you're going to start talking about things.
Microcosm, macrocosm.
Yeah. And that's, again, the fractal card is in there, which speaks to that also.
I realize it's something to help disentangle the thing that Mark's raising on, is the difference between content and process. And I have a feeling an awful lot of your frustration has to do with content. They're not talking about what's important. Whereas at the process level, it's can you raise an issue in the group that is not what the group is ordinarily looking at? Is there?
That's not what I'm actually.
Well, I'm just saying, from a process perspective, that's the kind of question you're asking. Whether they're willing to take on relevant things to handle peak oil is not a process question. That's a content question.
Well, actually, I'm actually saying the reverse, because most of the time the frustration I have is a fair number of people in the group, sometimes even the majority of the people in the group are willing and say, yes, this is important, and there's an alpha who says, no, we're not going to do it.
Now we're at process. So the question is how do you get, and it's like follow the energy of the group is one of the things here. So if the energy of the group wants to go somewhere and somebody is stopping it, that's a critique of the process.
Well, doesn't the take responsibility card come in then because the group is just being sheep and...
Yeah, well then we can get into the organizing you do beforehand to do your coup.
Well, I mean, one question it raises for me, obviously, is if you run into such a large number of individuals in whatever groups who want to address the larger questions that you're raising, it makes me wonder if you've ever just reached out to a bunch of those individuals and tried to start your own group.
Yes, but what I have found is that the identification with the old sclerotic structure was too strong to go, okay, that one's not working, we need something different. And maybe it's my organizational lack of talent, or maybe there's something else, but I have not found it effective. And in talking with allies in other communities, I have found very similar patterns on these issues. So it's not a Eugene thing. It's not a me thing. It's a broader cultural pattern.
So to me, that's very helpful because you identified one obstacle has been a leadership who seems to step in the way of taking on larger questions. But now I'm hearing there must be something else also, because when you reach out to the people who seem to agree with the scale of questions that we want to be addressing, somehow things still aren't coming together. So that might, just raising that question, what is it that has kept those people from coming together, might lead to some answers that give you some clues about where else to go, what else to do.
There's a quote from Martin Luther King on that very topic, where he says that people do not easily become dissenters. And I'm garbling the quote, and that applies to your country, it applies to your subgroup, it applies to really anything that you identify with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know Gandhi worked with I'm forgetting his name right now, but there was an activist, a warrior in Afghanistan who plugged in with him, somewhere along the way of the process for independence in India. And he went back and organized among his people, the Pashtuns, and they had incredible success. Like very quickly, they got a lot of people organized. They had, very large, very successful nonviolent actions. And he came back at some point and was like, why is it going so much faster among my people than among yours? And Gandhi said, well, your people are warriors. They are willing to go out and die. And, nonviolent activists, if they want to take it to that extreme, you have to be willing to go out and die. They're no longer willing to go out and kill, but they're willing to go out and die. And those people, had that deep in their culture already. So the idea of putting themselves out on the line and being willing to take a beating, that was more there already. And that's, yeah. And that, we have a card here, courageous modeling, which is a lot about that.
I don't want to break it because we're getting into a really interesting discussion of activism, but I also want to
come back to
hear more about the cards and maybe go on with the workshop. So I'm wondering if there's a way we can work the cards back into it somehow.
Yeah. I want to offer a bridge. Maybe going into those groups and becoming an advocate for the cards will be a sort of Aikido move, because once the group gets into doing the cards and examining itself and becoming aware of its culture, it might start allowing more of that group energy to surface and dissolve the old culture that people are so stuck in. Just a thought.
No, it would make it easier for you to name, which is another card, naming, to name some of the dynamics in a way that's then, it might make it less, it might be easier for people to see it's not about you. You're just saying, hey, here's a bunch of cards that some experts in groups said show are good patterns. And that probably the people in your groups would resonate with as the values that they want. Maybe.
Worth a try. Anyway, it's a way to bridge over to the cards.
I think you raised a good point, though, Tom, because I think to just the cards are a good tool for planning and everything, but if you're going to use them in an event, you kind of have to have some level of buy-in from the people. You go to impose a process that people are not familiar with. That resistance thing comes up again, and so there's this level of buy-in is the only word I can come up with. Is, are we willing to try a new way of doing things? Here's this really interesting idea of groups and subgroups. Would you like to talk about that? Would that work for us here? I don't know if that's...
Or recruit people before the meeting who might be interested in this, and as there's more and more of them, they say, okay, now we're going to move into the meeting. I don't know, whatever.
And you can use the cards yourself to think about an event without ever bringing the cards to the group. That's one way to do it that doesn't require their buy-in of the cards. But I think you're right as a general thing, that when you introduce something new to the group, you're going to want to be conscious of what the group culture is already, and then aware that if the thing you're doing represents a different way of doing things, than they have, then you will want, again, getting their buy-in would have to do with the invitation, being clear, here's this thing I would like to do differently in some way, and making clear what that is. And then if you're serious about the power shift of not just you're going to oppose it, but then inviting their commitment, or testing if they, which is another card, commitment, or moving toward alignment, checking if the group is moving into alignment with doing the new thing that you're proposing.
I'm curious about that method mapping concept. Are we too early for that, or is that?
I would like to go a little bit through these, but yeah, we could spend some time on that when we get to that. So one way that you can use the cards for learning about group dynamics is to just be aware of your own, to use them to think about what are your strengths and weaknesses in relation to groups. So I'll just do some of mine to give an example of that. One of my favorites is guerrilla facilitation. I'm often much more comfortable being in a group as a participant and then just noticing some little thing I could do or say or ask that might shift things in a better direction. So be a little guerrilla facilitator from the edge. And that's actually more comfortable for me than being the facilitator and that's my, I have to be responsible for that role all the way through. So that sort of points both a strength and a weakness of mine. I feel like I'm good at doing it as a participant, and I'd like to be more competent to go ahead and be explicitly in that role as a facilitator. Another one that's I think a strength for me is inquiry. I'm often good at coming up with, well, what's the question? Where you might go from there. So I think that's a strength, and I think I sometimes have a bit of a corresponding weakness of I keep wanting to ask the question, what else is possible? Where else could we go? We need to make a decision. I know, but here's let's make a question that might open up 7 other ways we could do it. And Patrick and I think, are often a good balance with each other working on this project, because I'm like opening up to more things than we might have considered otherwise. And at some point, Patrick's like, yeah, that's cool, John, and the event's in 2 weeks. We really need to settle some of the details and get them down. So,
Are you a software engineer? Right?
Yes, I have been. So another I would say is going deeper, like, what's behind that? What's into another similar flavor to the inquiry? You can always go deeper. I really enjoyed a recent Occupy Eugene meeting where we were talking about what's the root level of objective of these different campaigns we're working on. And the conversation got so abstract at some point. Chester was like, so, wow, it sounds like there might be really ultimately one root level objective behind all the different things we're doing. And it's like, oh yeah, the ultimate depth where it's all one, right? I mean, it gets spiritual, and really, that stuff's real for me. Woo-woo aside, I mean, that's for real. And, similar to the other things I was saying, at some point you want to bring it back to, and what are we actually going to do, with this deep, profound realization. Our messaging isn't going to just exist of empty boards that implicitly, declare that we're all one. We do want to actually put something on them that will think and that we go somewhere with. I'll skip that one for now. And then a couple that I know are weaknesses for me are rest. I put it upside down on purpose. Tarot card. I don't give myself enough downtime. My therapist recently was like, I've had this thought before. He's like, do you ever try scheduling your own time in your calendar? And it's like, yeah, I've done that. But then if I'm scheduling something with somebody, I treat that as open space. I can just move it aside for to set up something with somebody. Or letting go. Sometimes I can get on something where I'm like, oh, but I want it to be like this. And it's like, no, you gotta learn to let it go. So I know that's something I need to learn about. And one way to go at that, you can go through the cards yourself to think about what are my strengths and weaknesses in regard to groups. Maybe an even better way to use it is hand the deck to somebody else and say, tell me which of these you think I can help do well and which do I need a little more work on. So that's on that. During an event, just kind of one totally random thing you can do in a group. If you're stuck, like, wow, the conversation's falling apart, I have no idea what to do, I'm just going to take a card at random. Common ground. Oh, right. I could ask the group, okay, I hear that there's some differences, but is anybody hearing anything that we are all on the same page on? Or if you have your own idea, it could be like, I just want to remind us all that we do all care about the environment, right? Do I have that, common ground? Okay, yes, all right, then where can we go from there?
Well, but where that breaks down is most people like having an environment, but the willingness of a group to say that greenwashing is not really so wonderful is where all these processes don't really work for me. And
so let me try to address that in a second. But first, I just want to check if you're getting the only point I'm trying to make right now is if the group seems stuck. One way to use the deck is to pull out a card and see, does this give me a clue where to go? And if a group is fighting, well, wow, this actually might be a good thing. And you might pick something that it seems like it's achieving nothing if we agree we're all in the environment, but if in fact people were fighting and this helps remind them that at least in some way they are on the same side, that can be a step forward in the process. Now I'm hearing you raise the question of okay, everybody agrees to that, but then what do you do, if I'm hearing you right, what do you do if and I guess I didn't fully get what it was. So you're saying, what if a group all says that greenwashing is okay?
What I'm saying is sometimes when you talk about vague concepts, people are on the same side. But when you talk about specifics, that's different. And one
Right.
thing I've noticed about Eugene's activist culture, quote unquote, is the proclivity to just throw out the invite to the whole world and see who shows up. And what that does is it screens out parents, people who have 9-to-5 jobs, people who have lots of other things in their life. And so you get people who don't fit those categories. You know, it's very rare to have people in those categories come to these type of groups. And people are all over the spectrum in terms of shared understanding or skills or other intelligence. And I don't think there's not the common ground and that you can then have a good group process based on top of it.
You lost me a little bit. Of like,
What I'm saying is that if you're going to have, like with the West Virginia Parkway, we had a consensus, supposedly, that we were against building the highway and building any part of the highway. And then you had 3 people in the group who were the most well-connected politically, 3 people in the group, hammer home trying to build part of the highway over the objections of the rest of us. And they were the ones whose opinions carried the day. One just got defeated as being a county commissioner, Mr. Rob Handy. Mary O'Brien, Rob Zako. And it turned out that one of them was actively trying to sabotage what we were doing because it was his way to get a job with the state of Oregon, and didn't matter what the rest of us thought. And most of the people in the group didn't want to challenge their, quote, allies to say, no, this is not what we agreed on. And so the few of us who were willing to stand up got kicked out.
so I'm hearing this as another example that we could dig into how the cards might help with, and I just given
How do you
this,
deal with provocateurs?
What?
How do you deal with
That
provocateurs?
would be a whole other question, right? But I think given the time remaining, and I've worked with a couple of things you raised, I want to see if we can get to her question about method mapping, and then we'll actually be probably pretty close to the end at that point. But I'd be happy, to stay afterwards a little bit and talk more. So method mapping.
Well, how about the reflection degree?
Reflection degree,
skip
yeah.
that over.
Too. So, that's another way of using the cards is after an event, which I'll invite us to do in a few minutes or towards the end of the event. You could use the cards by handing a few out, as you have already, or just from whatever the cards that you've seen or heard, talked about. Whatever cards people know, but just to ask people, similar to the way I did at the beginning. So, what patterns did you see us, use today, during the event, or not use, as a way of reflecting on, what we did and what worked. What things that we did helped the group go better, what things that we did or didn't do didn't go as well. One thing that I've done during some groups, especially if they're meeting for a long time, is just while the group is going on, I'll set aside every card that I see the pattern happening over time. And if it's a long enough event, I'll actually go most of the cards. Like if it's a 2 or 3 day meeting, I could easily go through most of the cards. And then I think it's very interesting both to look at what patterns we manifested and which ones did we not. And are those lost opportunities? Are there wonderful things that could have happened if we had used those? Or is it because of the nature of that event that those patterns just didn't matter as much? But I think in general it creates also another opportunity for a group to see if they're being true to their own values. So I imagine that kind of thing, Tom suggested for some of the groups you're in, if you got them interested in using these cards, then at the end of event, if it became a regular practice for people to sort of debrief how that went, that would be sort of a key moment for the group to see if they are living up to their own values in the way that they want the group, or they say they want the group to operate. So, anything you want to ask or thoughts about, anything so far before we go to method mapping? Well, when I've thought about talking about method mapping, one of the challenges is how to pick a method. It helps if we pick a method that everybody has some familiarity with already. So I want to check if everybody has at least some experience or some idea about how consensus works. Okay.
You mean like formal consensus process?
Which kind of consensus?
I meant it without specifying exactly.
Okay.
But the conversation might get us into the difference between how different groups do consensus. So yeah, the cards you have in your hand, or any of the cards you've seen us talk about today, what patterns do you see as being most important in consensus, or that you see happen most in consensus?
I have informed the group mind. We gather facts, feelings, perspectives to reveal and deepen the group's awareness of itself and the world. Most helpful information comes from diverse sources and is accurate, relevant, accessible, and compelling. That part of consensus is trying to cover, my understanding of consensus, trying to cover the ground of whatever issue you're working on, and welcoming diverse voices and perspectives, and particularly asking for them through the use of concerns. If there are any concerns, we're going in a particular direction, any concerns, and that surfaces the information, the next piece of information that will increase the quality of the decision, if it's done right.
So that's it. In consensus, when you ask for the concerns, you're inviting the group mind to become better informed, by hearing things that may not fit the proposal. Any other ones?
I'm just holding space again, to be open to having a consensus, to be in that secure place where it's not perhaps an attack on an individual. You're calmly maintain trust, safety, and focus to then arrive at that consensus.
So maybe, like, as the facilitator, to do your best to not be attached to how this thing comes out, to hold the space for all the different things to.
In the model that we use, the final step of consensus is commitment. If we say we're all in consensus, then what we have to do at the end is say, okay, then are we all committed to this being what we do? And without the commitment, we aren't in consensus.
Yeah, I think that's a really key thing. I see a lot of groups, especially when they have a lot of people who are new to consensus, who treat it as a decision-making process, the way they think of the conventional system making decisions. And it's like, once the group makes this decision, just kind of, it will happen. We'll all have agreed that that's what's going to happen. But consensus isn't just about all agreeing that that would be okay. It's about, are we actually going to make that thing happen? And if that commitment isn't there, then you don't really have consensus. You just have some people agreeing that that would be a nice thing.
Acquiescence.
Yeah, they're going along with it, right?
I like that one. Shared airtime.
Yeah.
Finding the balance of staying on task, but also allowing new ideas in.
Along those lines, purpose. Purpose. Remembering why you're there, sharing your time.
So, like, being reminded of the values behind why the group chose consensus in the first place.
Yeah, I think you had another card that was seeing the forest, seeing the trees, and remembering to do both.
And you connect that one to consensus also?
Yeah.
Say more.
Well, it's easy to get lost in a dialogue in a group of people and forget why you're actually there. So you stop seeing the forest for the trees. So you need to remember that you need to pay attention to the details, but there's also an overarching reason why you're doing this. And you can't lose sight of that in that process. Because otherwise you can't commit if you don't know what you're all there for.
It reminds me of one of my favorite consensus stories is Randy Shute, who I learned about it a bunch from, worked with or maybe just heard this story, I don't know, a Quaker church, and they had some land. I mean, they didn't have a lot of land, but they wanted to build a basketball court for the kids in the neighborhood to use. And they had a graveyard where just like 2 of the graves kind of stuck out and really made it impossible for them to have this thing be a place that would work. And they could not get consensus to move the graves because there were some people who had known those people and simply refused to allow them to be moved. And it resolved when those people eventually died. And then the group had consensus to build the basketball court.
That is a saying in
now
Quaker
some people,
one good Quaker death will have our consensus.
one good Quaker death, in this case 2 good Quaker deaths, and they have their consensus. Now,
that's how progress happens in science.
yeah, and some people would say, and there certainly are cases, where that's a real problem, but but there are cases where I think that's completely appropriate. Like, if there are people in the community that something doesn't work for, and it's not a life or death thing. I think if they needed the land to open a shelter where they would house and feed many people and so on, they might have worked to find some way around that, more or whatever. I don't know, but it's if you want to see the positive side of that change, having to wait until those people died, the positive side of it is connected to the forest of that you were talking about. Why do we use consensus? We use consensus because we deeply respect each individual, and we don't want to thoughtlessly or needlessly override individuals. But of course, if instead of a basketball court it was something they or one of us felt really strongly about, then we'd be working to find out ways to get consensus, to get those 2 people on board with it. But, any other patterns?
I think right-sized bite is a really good one for consensus building, because frequently if you pick the wrong size issue to tackle, you aren't going to form a consensus. If your issue is way too big, you won't get people to agree. But if you pick sort of the right size issue, it can be a lot more easier to
And I'd like the way you frame that as being, if you're trying to build that up, like if you want to give people hope that it can work, you don't want to start with some difficult decision that's going to drag on for several meetings. You want to start with something where you are going to get consensus pretty quickly, and everybody goes, hey, this can work.
Yeah, if we're talking about the environmental movement, for example, if a group tries to get together and say, how are we going to fix the world, you're never going to get consensus about how to do that. But if you say, how are we going to build this park for our kids to play in, you're going to have a lot more opportunity for consensus.
It's actually part of agenda building from what Tree teaches. The first couple of things on the agenda should be things you can do really quickly, give people a sense of movement to it.
Yeah, we're doing a remodeling job at our center right now, and what we did was break it into 4 stages. Because you had everybody, and we've got to come up with the money for this big project. It just seems like forever and ever, and all we're doing is raising money. But when we break it into a small project, the minute we broke ground on this one section that's going to take 3 weeks, all of a sudden money started pouring in because people were going, oh, wow, this is cool, it's happening. It's that little piece that we can do, then we can move forward. It really does. The movement creates amazing energy.
And it's interesting. One of the things that keeps, as I've been around these cards for a couple months now, and it's interesting to see how people will pick up the cards and realize how they've already been doing all of the patterns that they all describe. Just that the cards are a way of just sort of describing what's already there, or allowing a tool for intentionality around what's already there. So that's just what came up when the right size bite thing came up, and you're like, oh hey, we've already been doing that.
Well, and when she was talking about the forest and the trees, the commitment card says, remind yourselves of your larger purpose and what you really care about. That's the center of the commitment card, is going back to what is our purpose? Why are we doing this? It's not about this project, it's about the bigger picture.
Just to mention one more card I'd throw in on consensus, it seems pretty key to me, is trust the wisdom of the group. That seems to be like a lot of what consensus is about. Why would we do it if that wasn't there at least? You know, there's the other piece of honoring each person. Okay, I want each person to be free, so each person has to be able to consent to it. Okay, yes, you know, but that's kind of the protecting us from oppression part of consensus. You know, the more hopeful part of it is about, wow, I actually believe that the wisdom of the whole will actually be better than, you know, any process that doesn't as fully respect each individual. So we could probably connect all 91 cards to consensus. But I think part of the value and idea, you know, behind method mapping would be to say, you know, which of these cards, you know, most, you know, has the most to do with what consensus is.
It'd be a whole different set of cards if we were doing Robert's Rules of Order.
Right, exactly. So now I want to walk our talk a little bit and invite what I suggested earlier, reflection or debrief of today. What are some patterns that you noticed in particular that we did do or did not do this evening?
Would it be possible to get a new set of patterns?
Yeah.
Just for the sake of
I have 2 different stacks from 2 different decks, and I want to make sure I don't mix them up. But yes, I have a few more patterns.
Yeah, you don't want 182 pickup.
You can take 3, 4.
Whatever you want.
Pass some cards. Here, take 3 or 4 and pass to the right.
Or 5 or 6.
5 or 6, sure. There are plenty of cards.
Can you take it?
Yes, take them all.
Okay.
I don't think these.
Well, I have one right away.
Okay.
I love opening and welcome. That's just so nice and easy to understand and basic.
And do you feel like we did that here?
Definitely. Yeah.
What in particular did you like about the opening and welcome?
Well, you greeted everybody. We introduced ourselves. We just felt like you really were very attentive to us, you know, creating the right size circle, and felt like you were really, you know, like I said, just aware of us being together. I don't know. I feel so simple-minded, but yeah.
Anybody else have one?
Along with that, I have the hosting card. I thought that went very well. It's wonderful to have the cookies and tea and coffee and to know where the bathrooms were. It seems to become a strange space, and then it's just a space in which dialogue can happen. So even entering the building, you're always kind of apprehensive. Where do we go? Well, this is downstairs. So that was very nice.
And I got the blank sign you were talking about. But just total bliss. Yeah.
Create it all.
I have mapping and measurement. I think that's a great example of use of a visual aid. I'm a big fan of anything involving flip charts, and I think that's really helpful to kind of have that guidepost for where we're going and remembering what we've talked about so far.
Does anybody have balancing structure, flexibility?
Here we go. Balance, structure, and flexibility.
Because I felt that was the dance between specific, the getting through the agenda and addressing particular Mark's concerns. So the dance between that, having to figure out how to do that to get optimum satisfaction from as many people as possible. I thought you did pretty good.
And I would go with that. I have yes and, which is much the same. It's build on what someone said to offer encouragement and carry it further, affirm their ideas, and extend them to a deeper understanding or add a new twist. And I think both you and Patrick did a really nice job of keeping us on task, but listening and speaking and pulling every idea back into what we were talking about.
I'm hearing good things, which is great. But I just want to point out, I'm also open to hearing like we didn't do this pattern, which also could be a good or bad thing. But yeah.
I got honoring each person, and I also thought you did a very good job this evening of staying on task and also dealing with other conversations at the same time.
And I have experts on tap, which certainly you talked a little bit about your background and you know what you're talking about. And I know this is not about just the leaders, but having other people in the group. But I guess the fact that you didn't do it all by yourself, you brought in another experienced person.
Are these things we didn't do or things that we didn't do that we should have done?
Either.
Like, well, it's like discharging was not something we did much of. And it's probably appropriate to not have done that in this group, but
Right. That relates to, I think, right-sized bite. So even in a workshop that is, say about personal development and emotionally challenging things, if you only had 2 hours, and you wanted to invite examples, you might want to tell people, don't pick something about the lifelong fight you've had with your brother that's incredibly deep and bitter. Pick something that's a doable challenge to be able to discharge or work with or what have you. But since this workshop wasn't even so much about those kinds of things, I think you're probably right that like inviting discharging probably would not have been the most fruitful thing.
And there were no nooks in space and time, which in a 2-hour workshop and that was unstructured time and semi-private space for open-ended conversations. And in a 2-hour workshop, it's really hard to weave something like that in.
Right.
I would have an inquiry about whether expressive arts could be fit into this in some way. I don't tend to go in that direction. I'm a very hitty kind of person, but I could imagine having a what's the kind of drama that reflects stuff that's going on?
Multiple perspectives.
No,
Theater?
Oh, playback theater.
Playback theater. I could imagine having a playback theater group act out particular group process, and then we all see who's the first one to get the card that reflects it.
Well, thank you. I'm sure we'll move on with that, but I want to have some closing bits to do, so I want to leave space with that. So, and thank you. And anybody who wants to give feedback, positive or negative, afterwards, feel free to come up and talk to me.